Can you talk to us about some of the attacking subtleties that we saw last week? And again, with the caveat that it was Japan, but it wasn't just Japan, because we saw it in the summer as well, that, and we saw it against England, that what Mike Catt is trying to do is different. The game plan is evolving from where we were, as it should do, because this is sport and if you don't change, you die. What are you seeing? What is making us a more interesting and varied attacking team?
I think one of the big aspects that has become very apparent is the work rate of the back three, and how they're adding an extra number into what looks as though it's kind of 4-on-4s or 5-on-5s. All of a sudden, the work rate of Keenan and Conway in particular. Lowe still has a bit of work to do, but he's a different back three sort of player. But if you look at the amount of times that Keenan worked from one touchline to another, sometimes not even trying to fill into the middle of the park, but working to the edge and making himself an extra man. Likewise for the Bundyaki try, Conway working hard from one side of the ruck right across, behind the second receiver pass. I don't know, was it Sexton that gave it to him? But then quick hands himself to nudge it on, and then Aki gets in. The creation of those only coming from working hard, but understanding that you can be the difference in unlocking watertight defences. And talk about watertight defences. The New Zealanders have improved vastly defensively. I think they've given an awful lot more focus to it. But the other nuances are the screen runners, the players that are being passed behind. All of them are viable options, and they're sitting down defenders inside. Whereas before, the timings of run might be a little bit off, where there's no intent in the run, or they're overrunning the ball player, and so they're not a viable option. And defensively, if you see that, it's easy to push off. You're able to see from someone's body language whether they're actually potentially going to get it, or whether they're disinterested or ahead of the ball, or stuttering, and all of a sudden you're pushing through, and that's where you make an impact behind the advantage line. So all of that was really, really sharp at the weekend. We saw a number of breaks from Lowe off kick receipt deep in our own territory, where they went to the pod out the back to Sexton, and then he picked up Lowe and went up the middle of the park. And it's the way they're looking to keep the ball alive. It's an unknown for Ireland to have that many offloads in one game. So I think that is why we're excited, and that's why I'm excited, is because it's the manner in which they're trying to play so much rugby and change the point of contact, and confusing defences as a result. Makes them very difficult to play against if they are allowed play that way, and if they can win collisions like they did against Japan. But that's a big if.
Yeah, let's just, if you look back now from the moment that we got this management team in place, and obviously they've added Paul O'Connell as they've gone, are we beginning to finally see the work pay off? Like, was this always there, or has there been some kind of transformation in their thinking that looks like over the last 12 months or so?
I think it's materialised quite suddenly, and they will say that it's been a work in progress, and that they've been building behind the scenes. And when you're not there and watching it and seeing the improvements at training and seeing the shape develop, it's very hard to to be objective with it. I have to say, up to the England game, I didn't see a huge amount of it, and I was still a bit confused around what they were trying to achieve from a shape point of view. But I think in the last 4 games, it's really emerged as to what they're trying to do. So often off rucks, dictated by, usually Johnny Sexton, or if he's out of play, it'll be by someone taking the lead, be it Jameson Gibson-Park or one of the ball carriers. You're looking at one back in behind that pod of 3, and then you're looking at a couple of forwards outside of that if it does go out the back to Johnny Sexton or whoever that back is. And then the option is to hit either of those forwards on a flat line, or to pull it out to the back again and go to the width, where you're going to have a hooker out on the touchline as well, or a tight forward. That's the beauty. You can have anyone at this moment in time. Even Tadhg Furlong out in the wing is a win for us. So it's just that the shape that it's sometimes difficult to fall into that, and it might take a couple of phases, 3 or 4 phases. I was really impressed with how quickly they were able to get into their pattern when they did lose shape, or where they got turnover ball, or they won a kick contest. All of a sudden they had a very, very clear understanding as they were what they were trying to achieve, but also then had the ability for Johnny Sexton to play in behind the ruck and pick a side depending on where he saw the defensive setup of the opposition. If they were low on numbers, as he did one time, he just swept back got the pod that had previously knocked it up, getting up on their feet. He told them to go again, and he swept down that side, and again creating 3-on-2s. So it's the shape is becoming very apparent. They don't get to the touchline very often, but when they do, they screen forwards. New Zealand did in the World Cup as well. They screen 2 forwards to make sure they don't get caught on the extremity and try and get into the middle of the park, because that's where you get to soften defences, and that's where you get an opportunity of creating those 3-on-2s.
So it looks like they're a very well coached side at the moment, and everybody's buying into the game plan. And ultimately, when it comes to an international side, you've got to. That's. It sounds like it's a very basic thing, but if you have that, then your players are going to be able to play to their best. They're playing without constantly thinking about things, and they get into some kind of a flow state, and then it's your best versus their best, and the best team wins.
The game is still about collision winning, and who can be more physical. And I think that has to be the basics of your performance, is that whether you have the ball or that the opposition have the ball, that you're winning that impact zone. And if you're winning it more often than not, it means quicker ruck ball, it means less settled defences. And we've talked about that ad nauseum, but that's the simplicity of the game. So first and foremost, can you create quick ruck ball? Or even better than creating quick ruck ball, can you continue changing the point of contact with offloads that New Zealand do so well, that you're not trying to have 20 rucks in any phase of play as we used to do 3-4 years ago. We're trying to minimize that. You want to have as few rucks as possible, because if you're keeping the ball alive and you're playing, in the broken field, no defensive team in the world can set well and organize themselves. So the least amount of rucks, the better.
Iain Henderson is back in the team. He's actually the most experienced member of the pack, and he's the second most experienced member of the entire team with 64 caps. Can Tadhg Furlong feel a little bit like, here lads, what the hell do I have to do? Or is that just the pecking order that fully fit Iain Henderson needs to be in the Ireland team?
Well, it's the ballast part too, isn't it? I think we know what we're getting from Tadhg Furlong, but the reality is second world, as international caliber second rows go, from a size perspective, he's on the slight side of things, and you just need it, that chunkiness. Also, Henderson's a very good ball carry, ekes out hard yards out of James Ryan as well. Very smart footballer. There's no reason why Tadhg Furlong shouldn't feel aggrieved. Of course he should, because it's still a close run thing. But I can understand why you would bring Henderson in there as well, to just tighten things up and just bring that physicality that maybe he just has an edge on Tadhg Furlong over.
You talked about the New Zealand team. We had Gregor Paul on from the New Zealand Herald on OTB AM on Wednesday morning, and he was saying that this is one of the great rivalries that New Zealand have at the moment. Forgetting about the World Cup, he very kindly said that, we've played four out of the last 5 times. Take the World Cup out, it's 2 each. And New Zealand take these games seriously now, because they know that this is an opportunity for them to put some context on the year. Is it going well? Beat Ireland, beat France. It was a great year. If they don't beat us and they lose to France, then bit of a disaster. They too are going through a bit of a change in style of play at the moment. So what do you expect from the team that New Zealand have named in terms of how they're approached the game? Because you've talked about their defence. Maybe tease that out for us a bit, and why that look a bit different.
Yeah, first of all, I think there is a newfound respect for Ireland in New Zealand, which wasn't in existence prior to Soldier Field. I think even listening to Sean Fitzpatrick and Richie McCaw, who played it down a little bit more before that game over in Chicago, they talked about how they always felt that they could get the job done irrespective of what went on. Even in 2013, when they were 5 points behind when the clock went red, they still fancied themselves. Whereas now, I do feel, and just reading some of the comments from Perinara during the week, talking about there's more analysis going on. There's more of a perception as to what way Ireland are playing. Before, it was very New Zealand focusing on New Zealand, and irrespective of what you threw at them, they would score more points with it, or they'd be able to deal with it. I do feel as though there's a bit more analysis going on, and they do feel that they will have a proper game on their hands, and that they could lose this if they don't play well. And it's great that Ireland have managed to get to that place. But talk about the defensive side of things. Again, the psychology in New Zealand was always to practice with the ball in hand. The defensive side of things was less fun, less entertaining, a bit of organisation. but not and then the physicality that was just expected of you. Whereas, thinking about physical defence and organisational structures in that is a relatively new phenomenon in New Zealand. Beforehand, they would always have been thought to have been quite a soft defence, quite a passive defence, but yet again just managed to get the job done. All proficient tacklers. Whereas now they're defending an awful lot more square. Wait to watch Perenara, who's particularly good at it. He's taking a lot of flyers, a la Gareth Davis in Wales, where he'll try and preempt when the scrum half's going to pass the ball, and he'll come shooting from the chip zone in behind the ruck and try and charge the first receiver and kind of rattle them a little bit, maybe get a hit in, and then just try and change the momentum. So there's small little tweaks and changes to this New Zealand defensive system that have been incorporated in more recent times that maybe they wouldn't. I'm not saying they didn't have the respect for teams with it before, but they never felt they needed that focus. Whereas now I feel as though they realise that they can use their defence as an attacking weapon on top of their ball handling game.